This isn't happening. This is a dream.
Jump, Edward!
There's often a split between what many people would say is the best twist of all time and what is their favorite.
If I stay awake any longer, the strain will be too much for my heart, and that'll be the end of me.
And that's why we're going to look today at my favorite episode of The Twilight Zone to see if it does have the greatest twist of all time.
You promise you won't put me in a straitjacket?
And the episode starts with a tired man trying his hardest to make it into this building. But with so many people around and so much stuff going on all at once, it seems like Mr. Edward Hall here is struggling just to stay standing. As he has to stop and lean against a light pole before making his way inside, it seems that all of the people that are passing from in and out through this revolving door is just making his head spin more and more. Now, I don't know what's going on here, but this lady just stuck her hand through the door. Why is there no glass anywhere here? Is it so that way they don't get reflections of the camera like they did in the first episode? It's here that Rod Serling gives us the opening narration to let us know what is going on.
12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene, an ordinary city.
It's lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people, and the next hour should be a rest for many of them.
To most, but not all.
Because many of them are probably stressed out about what they're gonna eat and how much they're fixing to spend. And luckily, you don't have to worry about that with Factor. You can take all the stress out of trying to figure out what you're going to eat for lunch and actually enjoy your hour, since Factor has chef-prepared meals that are ready in 2 minutes. And not only will you be saving yourself time, you'll also be saving yourself money because it is expensive to eat out nowadays. But the best part is their menu options, because you have everything from filet mignon to shrimp scampi with salmon to chicken Alfredo. There's so many options every single week for you to try out. And I'm talking restaurant quality meals that will have you stressing less and enjoying that lunch break again. And you can even save yourself more money by using my link to get 50% off of your first box and 20% off for your next month's box by using my discount code POLTER50.
Plus free shipping.
That's discount code POLTER50, and you can find my link down in the description and stop stressing so much over lunchtime, unlike Mr. Edward Hall, because to him,
time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death.
As he finally begins to make his way into the building, but having to stop before going through that rotating door. And he has a man come up to him and ask him,
"What's the matter? You sick?"
And not giving a response to him, he pushes his way inside, makes his way up to room 1410, where he can talk with Dr. Rathman. And the moment that he opens the door, we hear the secretary say,
"We've been expecting you, Mr. Hall."
Interestingly, though, we don't see the secretary's face just yet. But who we do see is Dr. Rathman as he greets Mr. Hall here. And it's very clear to us and the doctor that something is really wrong with Edward, as he can barely stand up.
I'm just tired.
And it seems that tired is an understatement. The doctor sees this and helps Edward over to his psychiatry chair, because I had to look up what this thing is called, and I just love the fact that long chair is on here. That's the funniest thing. But it seems that Edward could care less what it is, as he just lays down and tries to rest for a moment, and very quickly jumping up to walk some more around the room, causing the doctor to say, "I thought you said you were tired." And then Edward clarifies for us that he is the most tired man in the world because he has been awake for
87 hours. Almost 4 days and nights.
87 hours. I don't know how long you've been up at one time before, but my longest was like 60, 61 hours. And at that point, you're starting to see stuff and you're basically just sort of blacking out because of how tired you are. I don't know how in the world he's doing it, but whatever he's taken, it's got to be pretty intense. But to the doctor, he just figures that's the reason that Edward is here, is because he can't sleep.
No, doctor, not can't. I mustn't.
Because for Edward, he knows that if he falls asleep again, he's never going to wake up. So after getting a cigarette from the doctor, which is just funny to think about, he then asks him if he can walk around some more. That's really the only way that he can stay awake.
Stand on your head if you think it'll help.
And after having a little bit of small talk, Edward reveals that the only reason that he's even here is because his regular doctor suggested that he come see him. But that doesn't change anything for Mr. Hall, because he still believes that all of this is just a waste of time. And for the doc, he doesn't know because he doesn't really know anything about Edward other than his name, his age, his occupation, that he has a heart condition, and no history of mental illness. And so he just flat out asks Edward to fill him in on the rest so he can hopefully help. But Edward tells him there's no point and just to forget it, and goes to leave.
Now, you really think running away will do you any good?
It's here that the doctor begins to use his psychiatric powers to convince Edward to stay.
You promise you won't put me in a straitjacket?
And I love the doctor's response because he's just like, I don't promise anything, which I don't blame him because he literally doesn't know this guy. And for all he knows, this guy is a little unstable. As he walks over to the window, ask if he can open it up while he's opening the window to look out down at the street.
Quite a drop.
Being a quick thinker, the doc steps over there to shut the window and says, I'm going to have to ask you to step back in. And Edward claims all that he wanted was some air, and the doctor's like, okay, I'll turn on the AC. And that's when Edward looks at him and says, do you think I would jump? And once again, the doctor is honest and saying, you might have.
Not a chance. I want to live. That's my problem.
And it's here that finally the doctor tells him to just start anywhere with the story, and he'll try to piece it together to figure out what's going on and if he can help at all. And of all the places to start, Edward chooses to begin his story by talking about a picture of a ship that is hanging on the wall and telling the doctor,
I can make it move.
all right, maybe he does need to be in a straitjacket because... What?
It's not real. It just ain't as real as it seems.
But in true psychiatrist form, the doc just lets him continue so he can try to figure out if he's telling the truth or insane. Luckily, though, he clarifies that he knows that it's not really moving, but when he was growing up, they had a similar picture that hung on the wall, and his mother told him if he stared at it long enough, it would begin to move.
All I had to do was keep looking at it.
And at first, he just thought his mom was playing a joke on him, but the idea fascinated him so much that he sat down one evening and stared at the painting for over an hour until it began to move. And this is when the doctor cuts in real quick to tell him it's just an optical illusion. It can happen to anyone. It's not that strange. But for Edward, that's not the issue.
That after a while I couldn't control it.
It had reached a point for Edward that every single time that he saw the picture, it would constantly move and the cells would open up and the ship would dip in the water, and there was nothing that he could do about it. And he even clarifies for the doctor that whenever you have a pain in your arm, just because there's no physical sign, if your brain is telling you that your arm hurts,
It hurts just the same, doesn't it?
it's here that the doc kind of nods his head as Edward is now pouring himself a glass of water and pulling out a pill bottle from his pocket to take something. Like I said, I still don't know what he's taking, but whatever it is, the doctor's like, how much are you taking a day? But Edward doesn't have any time to answer that question and just ask him, do you want to hear the rest of the story or not? As he begins to explain that at 15 he developed a rheumatic heart and that for the rest of his life he was going to have to try his hardest to take it easy.
No long walks, no stairs, no shocks.
No shocks of any kind. While some things are easy to avoid, the one thing that Edward has never been able to avoid is his imagination. As he brings up an incident that happened 3 years ago of a woman that was killed in her car because a man was hiding in the back seat. And ever since then, whenever he has to drive, which is pretty often, that thought comes into his mind that somebody might just be behind him in the back seat. I'll be honest, I've done this exact same thing of looking in the back seat, knowing nobody's there, but then you keep thinking about it.
I kept thinking there's somebody back there.
And it was through him thinking more and more that there was somebody back there and staring so hard into the rearview mirror that he begins to see somebody in the back seat. Because Edward's no longer paying attention to a road, another car has to slam on its horn so that way he can get Edward's attention, but he still doesn't have time and ends up in an accident anyway. And to Edward, after the fact, it doesn't matter if there was somebody in the back seat or not, because he still ended up in a crash. A crash caused by his imagination that resulted in a shock that the doctors told him his heart wouldn't be able to handle another one.
And has there been another one?
Not yet, but there will be one soon. because the moment Edward goes to sleep, he's going to have his last shock of his life. And he knows this for a fact because when he was a child, he always dreamed in sequence. Each dream would pick up where the last one ended and over again. And he knows this because he would always write down what happened so he could track throughout his entire childhood of all of the different dreams in the course of his life in the dream world that he was going through. It's here that the doc cuts in again to say that it's probably that your dreams are following the notes from your previous night and not the other way around. But Edward is so certain that that's not what is happening, because for a long time from his childhood till now, he hasn't dreamed at all.
And a week ago it started.
It's here that Edward begins to tell the first part of his last sequence of dreams and how it all takes place within a twisted amusement park.
It's the kind of place you see only in nightmares.
What's that? A weird dream sequence in something that I really enjoy. This is probably where it all started.
Everything warped and twisted out of shape.
The scariest part for Edward is how real everything is. Probably a lot like a lucid dream, and if you've ever had one, you know that they can get really weird really quick. Because I know for me, it only took me one to decide I'm never doing this again. And mine was nowhere near as weird as this, as we then see a man calling Edward over to the shooting gallery where the target is a spinning spiral. And I guess it's not a complete nightmare because it only cost a dime for 6 shots. If only they were still that much, because nowadays you go and pay $15 to get something like this. But it's just before taking a shot that Edward hears another man calling out about all of the beautiful women that they have within their attraction. So Edward puts down the rifle and makes his way over there, much to the confusion of the man running the shooting gallery, just in time to be introduced to
Maya, the cat girl!
And it's here that Maya begins dancing for Edward. Even though there are some other people off in the background, Edward's right up in front and watching her very intently. Until he runs away. It's at this moment that we hear Edward telling the doctor that he didn't know who she was and that he'd never seen her before. If he had, it must have been as he was just walking down the street and she stuck in his memory. But what he did know is that he had to get away from her because something in her eyes spelled trouble. Now her name is Maya, which is a Hindu word, and it has the meaning a supernatural power wielded by gods and demons to produce illusions, which is pretty on point. And back in the dream, as he's trying to calm down with a cigarette, Maya's then there to light it for him. And she asks, "Why'd you run away?"
I felt like it.
I love how he says that line. Then leaning in, she asks if he's alone because she's free tonight. And she grabs his hand and goes to run and says, "Come on, Edward."
You want to, don't you, Edward?
But he's just confused and even asks, "How do you know my name?"
I know a lot of things. I'm Maya. Don't be afraid.
He says that he's not, but both us and Maya can tell that he is. And this is where he makes it clear that none of this is real, that all of this is a dream. And Maya says, "I know," as she still leads him by the hand over to the funhouse and asks him to take her inside.
How can I argue with a dream?
And it's inside this funhouse that everything is freaky. There's monsters and weird creatures and all kind of scary stuff inside of this small dark space that would probably scare just about any child that would go into a fun house. But Maya doesn't leave much time for Edward to think about it much as she leads him further inside. And when they get to the right spot, she looks at him and says,
We've been expecting you, Mr. Hall.
What?
Confused, Edward asks what, but Maya makes sure to keep it so simple and tells him, "You can kiss me now." Edward's clearly hesitant at first, but then gives in. And after he asks the question of, whose dream is this anyway? And it's in the background that we can see an ape making its way across as a woman then screams and it scares Edward. And finally, in this moment, he begins to look around at all the other strange creatures that are here as Maya begins to laugh again. This causes Edward to go back with the plan that he should have stuck with earlier as he tries to run his way out of the funhouse.
That's when I knew she was trying to kill me.
And it's here that he woke up because of how fast his heart was beating. It took him over an hour to finally calm down and get back to normal. And it was so bad that he went back to his doctor to get another checkup, and the doctor told him that his heart wouldn't be able to take much more than that. It's then that Dr. Rathman asks again, did you know the girl? Did you recognize her at all? And Edward still insists that he has no idea who she is. But we're going to get to know her a little better as he starts back in on the next dream.
I was back in the amusement park. I was running.
And even though this is the next night for Edward during the day, in his dream it picks up right where he was whenever he had ran from the funhouse, and Maya still catches up to him to find him.
There's nothing to be afraid of, Edward. It's only a dream.
But to Edward's heart, it doesn't make any difference. There's still so much tension and so much shock that can happen within his dream that still could kill him. Maya here is still trying to convince him that this is a dream, nothing matters, you can do whatever you want because it's a dream. And then points to the passing roller coaster where she then grabs him by the hand again and they get on it. And we hear Edward telling the doctor again that he didn't want to, but he couldn't help it. He had to follow her.
Even though I knew exactly what it would mean, I had to follow her.
On the roller coaster now, as they begin their ascent up the track, it's at the top whenever Maya begins to laugh. Continuing her laugh on the trip down as they begin to fly on this roller coaster, Edward's just begging for it to stop. He's begging to be able to get off of this, and Maya just keeps telling him, it's too late. It's too late, Edward.
Jump, Edward. Jump. Jump, Edward.
And this is where he woke up 4 days ago. And he knows the moment that he goes back to sleep, he's going to be right back there on the roller coaster, and Maya is going to push him off of it. And that'll be the end.
On the other hand, if I stay awake any longer, the strain will be too much for my heart, and that'll be the end of me.
A complete lose-lose situation for Edward because he knows that he's going to die either way. And he's still convinced that there's nothing anybody can do. So he makes his way out of the doctor's office to go and get some fresh air. But the second that he opens the door and sees the secretary again, everything changes.
Maya!
As quick as he can, he steps back inside and shuts the door behind him, causing the doctor to ask him what's wrong, and he says,
It's her.
My receptionist?
But the doctor assures him that her name isn't Maya and it can't be her. Not saying a word, it's clear that Edward has his mind made up for what he's fixing to do next. As he sprints and dives headfirst out the window and screams all the way down to the street. Then we see the doctor still sitting in his chair as he slowly stands up, walks over to call his secretary, Mrs. Thomas, into the room. As they walk across the room together, and we see Mr. Edward Hall's body still lying on the long chair.
I'm afraid he's dead.
Confused, Mrs. Thomas looks at him and says, but he only came in a minute ago. And Dr. Rathman tells her that he came in and he just looked so tired that he told him to lay down, and
Less than 2 seconds, he was asleep.
then he let out a scream within his sleep.
Heart attack?
Probably.
The doc then says that there are worse ways to go,
At least he died peacefully.
as it then pans over to the window and we get Serling's final words for the episode.
They say a dream takes only a second or so.
And yet, in that second, a man can live a lifetime.
He can suffer and die, and who's to say which is the greater reality?
The one we know, or the one in dreams, between heaven, the sky, the earth.
In the Twilight Zone.
And now the question comes of how good is this twist? And out of our 5 categories that we have to rank the twist, we have to start with the story. And how well does the twist serve the story? And really, this story has 2 twists. The first being that he realizes the secretary is the woman from his dreams, and she, in his dreams, was telling him to jump.
Jump, Edward. Jump. Jump, Edward.
Which is exactly what he ended up doing in the real world. And I feel like if this were a different TV show, it would have ended there, and that would have been the twist for the episode. But because this is the Twilight Zone, we then get the second twist, that the moment Edward laid down that first time, the rest of it was a dream.
Less than 2 seconds, he was asleep.
Since the whole point is that he can't sleep and that he knows his last dream is going to end him.
Heads you win, tails I lose.
That's exactly what happens, just not in the way that you're expecting.
I'm afraid he's dead.
And I gotta say, it's not just very well done, it's perfect. This twist perfectly fits the story and serves it in the most perfect way a twist could hope to serve a story.
I mustn't go to sleep because if I do, I'll never wake up.
And so really, there's only one rating I can give it, and that's 100. For our second category, we have acting, and how well does the actor pull off the scene? And for a guy that got into acting by accident, he does really well here. He has this perfect balance of being tired, stressed, and yet confident in every single thing that he is saying.
I can make it move.
That I can't help but just being with him in the scene. With the close-up shots on his face and his voice in every single scene, and especially this look that he gives at the end when he finally decides what he is going to do to get away from Maya. It makes you ask questions like, is he crazy? Is he telling the truth? Was he in The Godfather? So for this, I have to give Richard Kant, who did die at the age of 65 from a heart attack, a 91. And for our third category, we have predictability and whether or not you're able to guess the twist immediately, or if after the twist, you're still thinking, how does that work?
What?
And I would be willing to guess that for many of us, we would guess this twist much quicker than the last 2 episodes of this series.
This isn't happening. This is a dream.
But I remember watching this for the first time and just by the end of it having my mind completely blown because it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this.
I've got a heart condition. I can't stand all this excitement.
Heart attack?
Probably.
But now I watch it and I'm like, oh, well, they almost gave it away here. If you're paying attention, the lights even go down for a minute and you're like, oh, that's what's going on. So I would guess it really comes down to how many times somebody has seen this kind of twist before watching this episode. So even with the little details in the episode to point to him jumping out of the window,
Jump, Edward! Jump!
Maya being the secretary,
We've been expecting you, Mr. Hall.
or that his imagination is so strong that it causes things to happen to him that he can no longer control.
But I also knew that my imagination could make me see something if I thought about it long enough.
You still have to get over this brief hump that happens right in the beginning. And since most of us are very attentive when we're watching something, I have to give this a 70 on the predictable side. And for number 4, we have satisfaction, and how is the payoff for the viewer? And once again, I gotta say that double twist really works in its favor to make it stand out, because it's like the first twist of, oh my gosh, the secretary is Maya. Wow. And then, whoa, he just jumped out of the window, just like what Maya said, jump.
Edward! Jump!
And then you see his body laying there and you're like, ah, it was all a dream the whole time, and his dream did in fact be the end of him. Be the end of him. It do be the end of him. And I know there's other things that have this same twist way before the Twilight Zone ever came around, but you can watch this episode and see how other people have taken this double twist, and then you have the reveal after the fact of, oh, it was all in their head. It was all a dream. Telling you, this show is way too influential and not enough people want to talk about it. But for this episode of The Twilight Zone, for everyone that's able to throw their pre-bias about this kind of twist out the window, it leaves us very satisfied and very horrified by how the doctor sums up what happened to Edward.
At least he died peacefully.
So for the satisfaction and memorability of this episode, gotta give it a 94. And for the last and most important category of all, we have the PolterGibbst. And it's the most important because it's my opinion, and this is 100. It's 100. It's my favorite. I don't know what to tell you. It's my favorite. I'm biased. That's what this category is for me to just let my biases run.
What do you advise, a straitjacket?
And it's not just that I love this episode, but it's how much this episode has shaped what I enjoy in horror. Because if you've watched any of my other videos, almost every single film that I have covered has a weird dream sequence somewhere in it. And so once again, this is 100.
I've got a heart condition. I can't stand all this excitement.
But when we total everything up, it comes out to an even 91 out of 100, putting Perchance to Dream just behind the last episode I covered in this series, which just so happens to be the episode that aired right before this one.
Time enough at last.
Meaning that while this is a favorite of mine, there are still better twists out there. And that could be true for the next video in this series, where we're going to look at my favorite episode of Black Mirror. And I'm sure you'll be able to tell right away why it's my favorite.
You'll find out.
Okay.
But we have to answer the question, what is the greatest twist in all of horror? And I want to know, what is your favorite twist of all time? And what is your favorite twist in the Twilight Zone? And while you're headed down there to the comments, be sure to check out Factor. My link is down there because it helps so much when you guys check out the sponsors. It allows me to continue making these videos on a much more consistent basis. And so for that, thank you, Factor, for sponsoring this video. And as always, thank you to all of my amazing channel members. You guys are the best. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking around as long as what many of you have. You guys are amazing. And so are you for watching this video all the way to the end and hitting that colorful like button so more people can also be able to see this video. But to you, I hope that you don't have any trouble sleeping tonight, that you have an extra blessed day, and that I'll see you in the next one.